Michael shook his head as he looked at the sun. It had to be near noon now, and here he was, sleeping under a tree like some drunk. He stood up and adjusted the strap on his pack, dusting his pants off as he looked groggily down at the adjacent trail. He looked left, looked right, and as he got his bearings, he hiked deeper into the woods. The Appalachian Mountains were beautiful. They always had been, and it was easy to believe that if magic existed somewhere, it was here. Mike to all his friends, had always loved these woods. They weren't the well-maintained parks you sometimes saw in the campgrounds, but they weren't the rough and often daunting wilderness that you saw out west or in Washington or Oregon. Those were old forests, full of life and magic of their own, but the Appalachian Mountains had always felt welcoming to him in a way that nowhere else did. He and his brother had often hiked in the woods around their parents' house, and he had never felt like his life might be in danger when he was hiking close to home. He considered the mountains his home, more than the apartment he had in the city or the home he had once owned in Habersham. This was where he felt alive, where he felt free. Michael couldn't really remember those places very well, but that might be the traveling companions that he had with him. The bottle sloshed merrily in his pocket, and as he walked through the woods, he would sometimes take little nips from the neck to ease the memories. Life had been hard lately, but this was just what he needed after a bad year. Bad year? More like a bad 5 years. He looked forward to these trips so much that he bought a calendar just for them every year. He marked the days till he could sit around a fire with Ian and talk about better days. When they were kids, their mother had called them Mike and Ike because they always thought alike. Michael looked at the trailhead and shook his groggy head again. How long had he been hiking? He should have been to the campsite by now. It was always in the same place, and he could have walked there in his sleep. His feet seemed to know the way better than he did, and he wondered if the fire pit would still be there. They had built it as kids, he and Ike. They had searched all afternoon for the rocks to make it. They'd been 12, and their parents had finally begun to slack off on their overnight camping trips. This would have been the 4th or 5th time that they had camped here. The spot, a place that they had both decided on, and he had decided that they needed to spruce it up a bit. This had led to some searching for logs, for branches, and the digging of the fire pit. Once they had dug down a little, Michael had decided that the space didn't look right. The two had looked at it with all the critical eye that a 12 and 11-year-old could muster, and finally decided that it needed rocks. A ring of rocks would be just the thing for their new fire pit, and so they set to searching for them. It had taken them all day. The sun had gone down by the time that Ike had come back with that final stone, but it had been there ever since. He thought he might be lost, right up until he emerged onto a familiar campsite and a familiar sour face. "How do you always manage to beat me here?" Michael said happily. "Probably because you always manage to show up late," his brother intoned, his face at odds with itself. He always seemed to be pleased to see him, but Michael supposed he wasn't happy to see him drunk and wandering the woods again. Irick, a hard name to grow up with, had always been a sober fella. Thoughtful, often dour, Irick and his brother were a study in contrasts. Michael was a big guy, with a mop of blonde hair and a gregarious nature. Ike was tall and lean, his dirty blonde hair cut short, and he seemed to spend most of his time contemplating the mysteries of the universe. Their father had always said that he had the face of a politician or a preacher, someone in a position to stand over men's souls or lives, and his face reminded him of someone with a heavy weight on his shoulders. "Guilty. I must have just gotten a little lost," Mike said, as he took a seat on a log across from him. The fire pit had survived, it would seem, and now there was a fire burning in it as the sun began to set. The brothers sat in silence for a minute, and Mike felt the fog of awkwardness drop over him. It had been like that for the last few years. They only really saw each other on the camping trips, and he hated that. He supposed it had something to do with his drinking. Once, he and Ike had been prolific drinkers, but then his brother had swapped his night of bar hopping for the whole 2.5 kids and a white picket fence thing. Ike's wife didn't like the way he acted when the two of them got together, and their last couple of camping trips had been dry indeed. He still came to the camping trips, though, and that was what counted. "You want one?" Michael asked, digging a beer out of his knapsack. "They're a little warm, but they drink all right." Ike slowly lowered his head and then reached into his pocket and pulled out a bronze poker chip. It was pretty, but it had definitely seen some battle. There was a 3 on it, and Michael guessed it meant it was his 3rd year. "Sorry, Mike. I've been sober for 3.5 years now. You drink if you want, but I think I'll pass." "Suit yourself," Mike said, taking a big swig of lukewarm beer. "So how is the old ball and chain anyway?" "Maggie's fine. Davy's almost 5 now. He looks a lot like you," he said, smiling sadly. "Davy? Who's—" But then it hit him and he smiled. "Oh, that's right. Wow, 5 years old. Where does the time go?" Ike shook his head sadly. "You ask that every year, and I never seem to find an answer." The words hit him like a sledgehammer, and Michael felt something deep inside him. What was it? Regret? Sadness? He couldn't say, but it passed as quickly as a cloud across the sky. "You know how it is, little brother. You just lose track sometime. Time gets away from you." "Yeah," Ike said, staring at the fire. "Time. That's just what I was thinking, too. You always did have trouble keeping up with time." Michael cleared his throat and took another big swig from his can before burping and launching it into the woods. "Well, I'll just have to send him something loud and flashy so he knows that Uncle Mike is still thinking about him." Ike made a non-committal sound, and the two of them lapsed into another long silence. "How about Mom and Dad?" Michael asked suddenly, desperately wanting to break the tension. "I bet they're still driving each other crazy. You know, Dad always says that's what he loves about Mom. She riles him up and makes him feel alive." Ike made a strange sound in his throat, like he was trying to swallow a towel, and when he looked up, Mike saw tears welling in his eyes. "My Dad died last year." Mike dropped the fresh can that he'd been about to open, beer spilling on the ground as he tried to find the words. "Dad dead? Impossible. Dad couldn't be more than 55. Mom and Dad had both had their boys young." They'd conceived Michael on prom night in their senior year, and while other people's parents always seemed so old and crotchety, their own parents had seemed so vibrant. "Dad just retired, though. How could he—" "Dad retired 8 years ago, Mike. Ike swallowed more sadness as he looked up. "He asked for you in the end. He wished you could be there. He wanted to see you before he passed. He wanted to see you so badly." "No one called," Mike moaned, stomping his foot down and sending the beer rocketing over the hissing fire. "I would have come. I would have been there. I had no idea." "How would we have called you, Mike?" Ike asked, finally letting some of the disappointment and anger slip into his voice. "You haven't kept a job since high school. You haven't had an active cell phone since—" he ground his teeth together— "since our parents stopped paying for it." Mike bit his lip. He wanted to be angry, but he just couldn't. Ike was right. He was kind of unreliable, but they still should have tried. "Sorry, little brother. Not all of us have it together like you do. I'm a tumbleweed, man. I go where the mood takes me." Ike looked away, clearly wanting to say more, but not wanting to hurt his brother. Mike was unreliable, that much was obvious, but he still loved him, and he clearly cherished the time he had with him more than he hated him. This was how it had been when they were kids, too. Ike had adored him, wanted to be just like him, back when there was something to adore and look up to. Mike had been a triple threat: football, basketball, and hockey. It had carried him through high school and gotten him a scholarship to the same college that Irick had worked his ass off to get into. There'd been no question whether Ike was going to college. He had a 4.0 GPA. He'd been on the debate team and the student council. He'd been a mathlete, and he'd covered himself in scholarship opportunities, grants, and extra funding for whatever he wanted to do. His parents hadn't paid a dime to send him to school, and his college savings had been used to pay off the car that he'd bought in his freshman year. He'd managed to get himself a bachelor's degree while still keeping pace with Michael, and as they pub crawled and frat partied their way through their college years, it was only now that Michael considered what that must have done to him. If he'd suffered with hangovers and sick bellies during football practice and baseball games, then he couldn't imagine having to do it through an accelerated study program or while acting as a representative for various college organizations. Ike didn't look up from the fire, and the darkness that came in the wake of the setting sun made his face look skeletal. "You were never really interested in getting it together, though, were you, Mike? Not after what happened with your shoulder. After that, you were never really interested in getting much of anything together." Mike didn't say anything, but the emotions were boiling around in his stomach like angry bees. Mike had made a habit of using his body hard, but what had happened had been a fluke. He'd been hit in his third year of what would have amounted to a general education degree, if he'd finished, and he'd been practicing his swing for an upcoming baseball game. Mike had swung at what he thought was the pitching machine's last ball, and when someone called his name, he had turned to say something to them. The explosion in his right shoulder as the ball hit him at around 95 miles an hour had taken the wind out of him, and he'd crashed to the ground as he thought for sure that he was going to die right there. Instead, he'd woken up in the hospital. His shoulder was broken, his collarbone had a nice-sized crack, and he'd have to be in an isolation cast for the next 8 months. There would be surgery, there would be more recovery, and Mike probably wouldn't play sports, contact or otherwise, for at least a year and a half. Mike had nothing but sports, and it took his injury to show him that. The pills stopped working the way they should, and Mike got stronger stuff to make it feel better. Surgeries had to be rescheduled because he was constantly high or drunk, and over time, Mike had to come to grips with the fact that his career was over before it had started. The junk helped with the depression and the feelings of worthlessness, but nothing numbed the real pain. No one could fault you for wanting the pain to stop, but you never quite lost the desire for numbness, did you? Michael wrung his hands together. "I guess not." The darkness settled around them as they sat in silence, both of them feeling the night as it crowded around their little fire and turned the world into a velvet dream. "I miss you. You know that, right?" Ike half whispered. Michael was still too drunk for feelings to permeate him, with much beyond sudden and often violent emotions, but he had to force back tears as he nodded. "I miss you, but I need to leave you behind, Mike." "Leave me behind?" Mike asked, looking up suddenly. "What do you mean, Irick?" Something about hearing Mike say his real name seemed to make him hesitate, but Ike powered through it as he laid it all out. "I need to stop coming out here. I need to leave you behind. When I think about you, it makes me thirsty. When I remember you and try to come to terms with what happened to you, it makes me want to fall into a bottle and never climb out again. I got a job offer from our old alma mater. They want me to come teach there. Offered to give me tenure if I'd stay for 4 years. I was excited, but as I walked across the campus, all I could see was your ghost. I could see you sleeping on the bench by student services. I could see you running with the team across the campus. I could see you posing for pictures in your new baseball uniform, and I felt for the first time in 5 years like I wanted to find the nearest frat house and drink until I couldn't stand up. I left. I had to reschedule, but I knew what I had to do. Ike looked up, his eyes pleading with Mike for something he didn't think he could give him. "Mike, you have to move on." The crickets and the crackling fire were the only sound for what felt like a lifetime, and Mike was left trying to process what his brother was talking about. Move on? What, just not see my brother anymore? How the hell could you ask me to do something like that? We're family, Ike. How could you ever think I'd walk away from you? But Ike put a hand up, and that was when Mike saw it. It was just hanging off his wrist like it belonged there. And even though it was faded, Mike would have noticed it anywhere. It was his lucky bracelet, the one he'd had in high school, the puka shells clattering merrily as he pointed. "Where'd you get that? That belongs to me. You should have..." But that was when he noticed the bracelet hanging off his own wrist. The two of them were identical. Could have been from the exact same kiosk at the mall where he'd gotten it when he was 15. But he knew that Ike had never had one. "I got it from you," Ike said, looking down at it affectionately. "It was the last thing you ever gave me." Mike shook his head, looking down at his own bracelet and trying to make sense of it. But no, that doesn't make any sense. I still have mine. How could I have given you my bracelet if I still have my bracelet?" Ike was silent for a moment, worrying his lips and trying to find the words he needed. "Because you were wearing it when we found you." "What does that have to do with anything? How many beers have you drank tonight? For that matter, how much have you drank on the way here? What are you, my mom?" "Our mom," Ike sighed. "But that's not the point. Just answer the question." Ike thought about it. "I don't know, 4, maybe 5 beers, and a pull off a bottle of wild turkey. Hiking's thirsty work. Remember when we hiked through the state park? We drank so much we got lost for 3... Focus, Michael. How much beer is left in your backpack?" Mike hefted the bag and was surprised at how hefty it was. "I don't know. Couldn't be more than 2 or 3, I guess. I had a 6-pack in there and a bottle of..." But when he unzipped it, Mike saw that the 6-pack was fresh and the bottle of wild turkey was unopened. "No," Mike said, the bottle clinking against the cans as his hands shook. No, that's not possible. I don't know how, and I don't know why, but every time you appear out here, you have the same liquor, the same clothes, the same everything that you had on that night." "What night?" Mike asked, getting frustrated as he slammed his bag on the ground. The bottles broke. He heard them break, and the hissing from one of the cans was also audible. Mike expected to see liquids leaking into the fabric of his bag, but it never came. Ike was silent, just watching him, as Mike tried to put it together. And when he opened the bag again, the cans and bottle were intact and full. He hadn't imagined it. They had reformed, and now he was left holding the bag. "What is this?" Mike asked, staring at Ike as his brother watched the fire. 5 years ago, you were on one of these camping trips. It was right before Davy was born, and Maggie didn't want me to go. She was worried about me drinking. We got in a big fight about it, and finally I promised her I wouldn't drink on our trip. She made me swore that if she smelled booze on me when I came home, she'd divorce me. And I promised her, on our son's life, that I wouldn't drink. You didn't like that, so you drank enough for the both of us. You spent most of the night raging and ragging at me, telling me how I'd changed if I'd let a woman tell me what I was going to do. You were sloppy. You had way more in your backpack than you do now. And you'd probably drank about 15 beers on your own. I told you I was going to turn in. We were supposed to go fishing the next day. You said you were going for a walk. I need to clear my head a little. The thought of you being so spineless is keeping me awake, you said. And then you stumbled off into the woods. Stumbling off into the woods, Mike remembered that. That was all he could remember with any clarity. All he could remember when it came right down to it. His apartment, his life before coming into the woods were all a fuzzy memory. and Mike found he couldn't really remember anything other than stumbling through the woods. The more he tried to remember, and the more he couldn't, the more freaked out he got. He was hyperventilating. His head was spinning, but Ike was still sitting there staring at the fire. You weren't there in the morning, so I went looking for you. These were our woods, and we were both Eagle Scouts. Even so, your trail wasn't hard to follow. You had stumbled through the woods, a beer can here, a beer can there. Finally, I came to a steep drop that you hadn't seen, I guess. Your head was a bloody smear across one of the rocks in the drop, but you were still alive somehow. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. You gave me your bracelet before you died, telling me to take it for luck. I've worn it ever since. I like to think that it does bring me luck. I fell into a depression after that, drinking to numb the pain, and Maggie let me for a while. She let me numb the pain until she couldn't take it anymore. She told me to get help, and I loved her and Davy enough to try it. I told myself that I'd give it a week, and if it didn't work, then I'd just leave. I'd leave so I didn't burden them, but it never came to that. AA was easier than it had any right to be, and before long I felt less inclined to drink. I've come a long way, but I couldn't quite stop the trips as easy as I could the booze. I came out here on the anniversary of your death, just wanting to remember you, but when you came stumbling out of the woods, just as you had on that day a year ago, I was speechless. Mike was still breathing heavily, but it all felt so unreal now. He couldn't remember any of this. All he remembered was going into the woods. Had he driven? Had he walked? How had he gotten into the woods in the first place? Mike rubbed his head. Why couldn't he remember? So wait, are you saying I'm a ghost or something? Ike shrugged. I don't know what you are, but you've come back for the last 4 years, and you don't seem to remember anything. It's like the camping trip where you died never happened, and you came back to camp the last time, every time. Mike just sat there, not sure what to make of this. I can't do this anymore, though. It isn't healthy to continue to fester here. Every year I come out, every year we argue about this, and every year you disappear into the woods again, and we do it again the next year. But no more. I can't do it anymore. I have to stop. This is the last year I'm coming out. I don't know why you stay here, but I can't haunt these woods with you anymore. Mike got shakily to his feet and began staggering towards the woods. I'm going for a walk. I need to clear my head and try to make sense of what you've told me here. I'll be back in the morning, then we can go fishing or something. Maybe after a good night's sleep, you'll be in a better state of mind. Michael headed off into the woods again, and Ike sighed as he shook his head and grabbed the bucket of water by the tent so we could put the fire out. The fire hissed like an angry cat as it went out, and it left Mike in the deep shadows that surrounded them. It was like this every year. He never remembered it, and it nearly broke Irik's heart every year. Never again, though. This would be the last visit, he thought, as he grabbed his bag and headed out of the woods. If Mike wanted to haunt these woods, then he would do it alone from now on. And that left a hollow place inside Irik that he doubted would ever be filled. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's show. If you think you might like a little more spooky in your life, then please feel free to click on one of the videos we have up here. Maybe look at one of the playlists if you're trying to get caught up. I know, there's so many videos on the channel. There's so many series that are going at the same time. Sometimes you just need a little refresher course, and I gotta say, I always enjoy the views. If you're not subscribed, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Maybe hit the bell so you don't miss anything. We upload a lot on this channel, so you won't want to miss a single story as they come out. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click on the Amazon link down there. There's quite a few books in my Amazon account. You can have a look, and if you'd like a signed copy, get up with me through email, and I'll be happy to work something out with you. Also, there's links to my Patreon, and you can become a member on the channel if you'd like your spooky a little bit early. Patrons and members on the $5 tier get their videos 12 hours early. That's in the morning as opposed to in the evening. Patrons at the $10 level also get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one. Speaking of my patrons, you should see them appearing right now. Just wanted to take a minute to say how much I appreciate all of you. Patrons, subscribers, however you give to the channel. I really appreciate everything you do, and it truly touches me that you have chosen to support the channel in this way. Well, that's enough for now. Till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.